Welcome to the Highest Health Podcast. Raise your health, elevate yourself, and enrich your life. Experience a world of health sovereignty. As you near your highest health, you near your most luminous self. Okay, welcome to Highest Health, Dr. Bill, and thank you so much for coming on. I am elated to have you.
It is truly my pleasure. I can't wait to have this conversation.
Yay. Well, there's so much I want to get into with you, and I'll go ahead and give you an introduction, and you can go ahead and expand on it. But for our listeners, you are a primitive technologist, but you're really a magician of many hats because you're trained as an anthropologist and archaeologist. You're also a chef, a hunter, a world explorer, a researcher, a father, the owner of a one-of-its-kind restaurant, Modern Stone Age Kitchen. You're an educator, an author. You're on a TV show. Like, is there anything you haven't done?
You know what I can't do? My kids make fun of me all the time. I can't make candy canes.
Oh,
I have failed every time. It's Christmas season right now. We can talk about this, but yeah, there's a lot of things I haven't done yet. But thank you for that.
Maybe it's coming in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All those things may sound like they have no relationship to one another at all, but they really do. They have there's a lot of overlap with all of them, and it's so interesting that I'm 50 now. I'm about to turn 51 next month, and most of my life I've been searching to try, just like so many of us, trying to find answers on how to feed myself, and over the past 20 years, how to feed my family. And it turns out that the answers that I were looking for was not in diet books, was not with nutritionists. It was actually in the archaeological record, in the anthropological record. And my work as a primitive technologist really helped to allow me to interpret life past from the archaeological record to better understand human diet and health. And it's literally transformed my life. It's transformed my family's life. And because of that, my wife and I realized that we could take this information and do so much more with it than just feed the people in our house. So we opened up the Modern Stone Age Kitchen to nourish the community as well.
Really cool. Really cool. This is kind of a side question, but before we get into all of this, I'm dying to know just personally, like, what did you want to be when you were little?
My grandmother took me to see Indiana Jones when it came out. The first one, in the theaters. I was, 5 years old. I forget how old I was, but I was very, very young. And she had National Geographic magazines on her, coffee table at her house, and something that had to do with Indiana Jones, exploring, something like that at some level. And I've been trying my best to get there for 50 years. I'm getting as close.
Awesome. Well, it seems like you're doing a pretty good job. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Okay. So you study essentially like our past diets and what we were eating, and you bring them into practicality for the rest of us who are living in the modern world. But how do we actually know what we were eating back then?
Man, that is a fantastic question. Let me grab something real quick. Let's see. Okay. Here's a good example. So real quick, just a little bit about archaeology, anthropology, primitive technology, and how they all relate together for people who might not know. So anthropology is this big, overarching, broad discipline that really just pretty much means the study of humans at some level. So really anything that you ever want to study, as long as humans have some sort of a role in it, could be defined under anthropology. Now, under anthropology, we have a bunch of different subcategories, things like linguistic anthropology, which is the study of language, human language, or biological anthropology, like the study of our bodies through time, cultural anthropology and the like. And archaeology, at least in this country, we consider archaeology a subfield of anthropology, which is, I guess, for lack of a better term, the study of dead people.
Okay.
right? But it's a study of dead people through the things that they made and used through their tools. So an archaeologist will excavate a site, usually digging into the ground at some level, and they're pulling up bits and pieces of, well, we call them residues of past activity. Just about if you threw a party at your house and you had this big blowout party, all these different things were happening everywhere. Somebody, a group of people in your home, outside by the pool, outside in the front yard, in the kitchen, wherever, we're doing all sorts of different things.
Okay.
And then they just walked away. And you were left with cleaning up the mess. Well, let's pretend you didn't clean up the mess, right? And all of those things were just left for 500 years. And somebody in the past had to come and look at all the residues of the activities. These people over here were playing, this game, and these people over here were doing this, and they were cooking over here, and they were having a barbecue. All the residues of those activities would be recorded in the trash and the bits and pieces of things that were left behind. So an archaeologist actually looked residues of these activities. And unfortunately, after 500 years, after 100,000 years, most of the things that were organic, things like leather and bone and wood, in many cases, unless it's under great preservation, those things decay away. So you're left with bits of ceramic, bits of bits of stone tools, and those sorts of things. And then you have to take that information and try to interpret what happened in the past. And you're right; it's a very, very difficult job. It's not an exact science. It's not like biology or chemistry or physics. I mean, there's a lot of interpretation here, but we have some really, really good methods that allow us to look into the past and really get a good idea what's going on. So a great example I just wanted to show you, to tell you where the primitive technology piece comes in. Primitive technologists are trained in replicating technologies of the past. So they could be things like making and using stone tools or primitive ceramics, or making nets or fibers or hide tanning, primitive fire making, primitive cooking, whatever it is, ancestral ways of doing certain kinds of things. So they're very skilled in the same sorts of technologies as our ancestors were. And that works really well with archaeology, because if you have, say, now this is a stone tool that's about 40,000 years old. This particular piece came from France. Now, might just look like a piece of a rock, but somebody who knows how to flint knap, or how to fracture rock predictably to make stone tools, can tell you exactly the stone tool technology that this was a part of, could probably tell you what part of the world it actually came from, and give you an approximate date on how that was used. And that comes from a long time of replicating the technologies and looking at the pieces. So this, for example, I'll give one more thing real quick.
Totally.
These are two different rocks, but it's the same technology. This is a blade that would have come, and it's nice for this picture because you have two different colors, that would have come right from here when it was struck. And then this is called the blade core technology. This is beautiful, gorgeous technology. Those edges are razor sharp. If it's made from obsidian, the edges are 300 to 500 times sharper than a surgical scalpel.
Wow.
And it can be used for all sorts of different things. Now,
how old is that guy?
What's that?
How old is that one?
This one's a replica that I made. So
Okay. Got
years
it.
old. But this is 40,000 years old. But at least how it all fits together.
Okay.
Actually, it's really cool to see it on the thing.
Yeah.
These tools would then be used for different purposes. So experimental archaeology, which is the subfield that I was in of archaeology, is we would find bits and pieces of things in the ground, or another archaeologist would find things and then ask people like me to say, okay, here's this tool. This is the context it was found in. We have no idea how it was made, have no idea how it was used, how useful it was, how efficient it was. Why don't you run it through a series of experiments? So then I would sit there and replicate the tool to figure out how it was made, and then use it in a bunch of different experiments. Say, you know what, this looks like it really could have been a butchering tool. Or this works great to peel, skin off of vegetables or something like this. Then often what we would do is look at the edge under a microscope and compare the edge of the tool, microscopic little wear patterns on the edge of this, and then compare it to the real tool and say, okay, if I had 10 of these and I use each one in a different way, and I look at the different wear patterns, and I look at the ones from the archaeological record and say, okay, this really was probably used to peel roots, or something like that. So we have a lot of this all works together in all of these different ways. Plus, we have all sorts of different laboratory techniques. Like you can take, if this tool was used to, say, again, peel something like a potato, for example, there's little microscopic pores in this rock, and starches from the potato, like tuber, would get stuck and preserved in those little crevices, and we pull
Okay.
them out. We've pulled out starch grains from 8,000-year-old tools and identified that not only was it being used on a vegetable, but it was also what kind of vegetable it was being used on.
Wow.
We can do it with blood residue analysis. If there was blood that was caught in a little crack of the rock,
I
if it was like
see.
a rabbit, we could tell that it was at least down to the family level what kind of animal was being butchered. So we can look at the tools. We can tell in many ways, get a really good idea about how they might have been used. We can sometimes tell what even material it was being used on. We can pull, if you found, let's say, a pot, a clay pot from the ground, we could also take samples in the pot itself and in the soil around it and tell not only what kind of plants or animals might have been in that pot, but also what kind of plants and animals were growing in that area, and look at things like phytoliths and a bunch of different things. But what's really cool is when you actually get teeth from people, and you can take the teeth and take the dental calculus, they aren't brushing their teeth, right? So you get their stuff teeth. You can tell what they were literally chewing on in many cases.
That's amazing.
So we have there's a lot of techniques, and there's much more than this, but there's a lot of techniques that we have that can give us a very general idea about diets. Some cases it's very specific. So like Ötzi, the Iceman they found in the Italian Alps, we actually were able to take his stomach contents and tell what his last meal was, and literally what his last meal was. And it was so precise that one of the plants that they found in the stomach only grew in a certain area, and they were able to tell what direction he was coming from because of one of the things that was found in the stomach.
Do you remember what his last meal was?
No.
Okay.
I do know there was some type of cured meat in it. I do remember that, which was
that is all incredible. It sounds so much fun. Do you have a favorite tool or a tool that you're most impressed about?
Favorite tool? You asked me really good. I wasn't prepared for that question.
I'm just personally curious because it sounds like so much fun. So I'm like discovering these tools. You got to have a favorite.
Yeah. Can I grab it real quick?
Totally.
Give me 30 seconds. I'm sorry.
For sure. Take your time.
Okay. Let's see. All right. So this is a super cool tool that was found. Now, this is a resin cast of the actual tool.
Okay.
This thing dates to like 23,000 years ago, and it was found at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay underwater.
Oh, wow.
And why it's important is, and I don't want to start a whole bit of craziness with this comment, but the technology used to produce this tool is very similar to what they were doing in France at that time, something called Salutrian. This looks like what we call a Salutrian laurel leaf. And there's actually a particular characteristic of this one spot on it here that's something called a controlled overshot lake. Regardless, this thing dates to about 10,000 years earlier than most archaeologists would have said anybody was in North America. Wow. And it appears, not to get into a whole bunch of North American prehistory, but it appears on the east coast of North America. And up until several years ago, most people would suggest that the earliest peopling of the Americas happened across the Bering Land Bridge, over into Alaska and then coming in. So the oldest artifacts happening should be found over there. But it looks like some of the oldest artifacts are actually on the East Coast. Wow. And there is a theory, and it's nothing more than a theory, but there's a theory that even though people were coming across the land bridge 12, 13, 14,000 years ago, there might have been people coming over earlier than that from Europe in skin boats. If it's true, it's kind of crazy to even suggest, but if it's true, this is potentially the oldest artifact in North America, and it really helps support that theory.
That's a pretty cool tool. And what do you call that again?
Most archaeologists would call this a Salutrian laurel leaf.
Okay.
It looks kind of like the laurel leaf sort of shaped. So again, this is not a smoking gun sort of, this is exactly what happened, but it's very cool to find an artifact that potentially is that old. It comes from the East Coast of North America and has a really strong, at least, relationship with the technology that was happening at that time in France.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that and finding it. Okay, so I know you've had a sort of a history with discovering all these different types of diets, like what works best for yourself, for your family. For our listeners, could you share what you've changed your mind about, either, most recently or not so recently? Kind of take us through that trajectory.
Most recently, what I've changed my mind about
when it comes to like eating and nourishing yourself and
sure. Well, a couple of the things that have major sort of tenets that we've rested the foundation that almost everything that we do at our home and also here at the restaurant has been on are the kind of things that have become mainstream more recently. Things like very animal focused approach, nose to tail approaches to animals, things like sourdough, real wild, long fermented sourdough breads, soaking and sprouting grains, no industrial nut or seed oils. I mean, those things are sort of a little bit more common now than they were even just a few years ago.
Right.
But potentially one of the things that have changed the most in just the past few years is probably our approach to oxalates. We have, and not that's, well, I guess it is controversial for many. Have you talked about that much on your podcast?
I haven't spoken about oxalates, but I would love to talk about it now, only because I feel like I've had episodes where I've detoxed oxalates, and it's not pleasant. But it's also fascinating. So I would love to hear more.
Sure, good. So I'll give you a really quick sort of maybe entryway into this for everybody listening. So for anybody who hasn't heard of oxalates, it's worth looking up. The cool thing, to me, they're one of the most dangerous plant toxins there is for a couple of reasons, which I'll explain in a minute. But the cool thing is, if you have an issue with oxalates, in many cases, it's something that you can at least mitigate, if not overcome, over time, and it doesn't cost any money. All that it takes is nobody's trying to sell you a pill, nobody's trying to sell you some product. It's just literally taking things out of your diet. But the problem is they're dangerous for two very important reasons. But before I begin, oxalates, I guess the sort of brief introduction to them is, under a microscope, they look like little shards of glass. They exist in many plants, and they're there for two primary reasons. One is they're defense mechanisms for plants, just like all other plant toxins are. But they also seem to play some sort of a role in regulating potassium and magnesium distribution in plants. I don't exactly understand what it is, but they're intentionally made by plants. But the main thing to remember is they're made by plants primarily as a defense mechanisms, and they're nasty. Just if you Google what they look like under a microscope, you'll see that they look like these little shards of glass. Yeah. So when you ingest them, our body has a very difficult time dealing with them, and our body can only deal with so many in a given day. And I forget what that number is, but it's not very high. An average spinach salad provides you like 3 times the amount your body can deal with in a given day. So they just a lot of plants we'll talk about in a minute. But here's the big issue, and this is why I think they're so incredibly dangerous. First off, when you take them in, the stuff that your body hasn't been able to deal with, your body realizes how incredibly dangerous they are and grabs them and sequesters them and like puts them in different parts of your body to kind of store them and get them out of the way. Kind of like in your closet and kind of forgetting about it. But they build up over time. Typically they get, and for anybody listening, to think about if one of the things I start mentioning, if you are experiencing pain or discomfort in any of these areas. So things like in your extremities, so often in your hands, very often in your feet, in your organ tissues, in areas that have already had some sort of trauma, like if you've had an accident and been injured, or that area, necks, joints, corneas are a big one. And anyhow, they build up over time. And this is what makes them so incredibly dangerous. If you eat something with oxalates, you don't really feel anything, right? And then you eat something with oxalates again, and you don't really feel anything. But this entire time, your body's building it and building it and building it and building it. And it isn't until months or years down the road of a high oxalate diet that you start experiencing, for most people, the symptoms of this high oxalate toxicity. And at that point, it's hard for your brain to kind of make that connection between this food that you've been eating every day or every week, or it's been a major part of your diet, and this problem that you're now just experiencing years later.
Right.
So I did a foraging class for a local school about a month ago, And we're walking around foraging. We found some mushrooms. We found this. We found that. And they were asking me about, what's the poisonous plant? What's the most dangerous plant? And there was actually a mushroom there that was incredibly poisonous. And I said, for many of you, you'd think I'd say this mushroom. I said, if I ate that mushroom, my kidneys and liver would shut down. Oh. And if I didn't die, I wish I was dead. That's how terrible this mushroom is.
Yikes.
And they're like, oh my God, it's so dangerous. I said, yeah, but it's only dangerous for me. Because if I ate that, you would see me suffer the next day and probably die. None of you would ever eat that mushroom again the rest of your life. I said, so it's not dangerous. What's dangerous is the stuff that you've been eating and you've been eating and you've been eating. It's causing an issue. And then 5 years later, you have all of these symptoms. And then I go and tell you, it's the spinach you've been eating. And you're like, it can't be the spinach. I've been eating it every day for 5 years. And it's like, well, exactly. That's exactly why you have these issues. So high oxalate containing plants are super high ones are spinach, Swiss chard, rhubarb, beets and beet greens, almonds, huge, pine nuts are huge, sesame, poppy seeds. These and the list goes on, but those are some of the biggest, the worst offenders. And if you realize, I mentioned a bunch of plants that some people would consider superfoods, right? So, superfood. Oh my God, spinach!
Yeah,
don't touch my spinach
totally.
Or my almonds. I'm on a keto diet. I live on almonds, and that sort of thing. And it's very unfortunate that those are really, really, really problematic. Kidney stones are almost always a result of oxalates. Not always, but almost always. Gout there's 5 things that cause gout. We only talk about uric acid, but oxalates are a huge, huge offender for that. Neck pain, joint pain, arthritic sort of pain, inflammation. For women, I don't know enough to talk about it, so I'm just going to bring it up. There's a lot of pain that can happen in areas that are specific to women.
Yeah. I've heard that too from Sally Norton.
Yeah, I mean, and so it goes on and on and on. Corneas, light sensitivity, and then if you have it, and then you start dumping oxalates, and then all sorts of crazy things can happen, like oxalates coming through your skin. I had oxalate when I was dumping. I had oxalates coming through the skin above my lips, and it was like little particles of sand. So painful.
Yeah, that's what I had too, and I was just like wiping them. And I was like, oh, this looks like a shard of glass. And then like I would look in the mirror and I would see something like flashing or like reflecting. And I'm like, there's like a little shard of glass on my face. So it was just fascinating. So
did you have any pains or
at the same time, I don't know if it was related or unrelated, but my skin felt like it was burning. Like not my face skin, but mostly like the backs of my legs. So I was like, I wonder if that's related to the oxalates. It was kind of felt like pinchy / burning. Thankfully, it wasn't like all day. It would just come and go in like 10 to 15 minute episodes. But other than that, I did have a shoulder pain that's I don't have anymore. So I don't know if that was related because you mentioned the joint pain. So
it is. Let me tell you very quickly what happened to me. And
yeah,
so it was, and this is after several years of changing the way that we ate based on everything that I learned as an archaeologist and anthropologist, and really for the first time in my life, really starting to feel like I had a grasp on my own health. And out of nowhere, like I felt great. My body was in good shape. I had energy. Everything. I looked in the mirror. I was actually happy for the first time in my life.
Amazing.
Sitting there, and then all of this, I had these pains, and there was one particular day, and it was actually there's one thing that sent me over the edge. I had eaten this really weird thing that a forager buddy of mine had made out of skunk cabbage, and anyhow, long story short, I had ingested a bunch of oxalates that I didn't know were there, but I mean a massive amount.
Damn.
And it turns out I had a very high oxalate diet, and this set me over the edge, but I didn't know it. This had happened on a Sunday, and then the next day on a Monday, I was teaching an archaeology field school, so I'm driving the minibus with all the students in it from college, and we went up and we're working this archaeological site all day. We're jumping on shovels, we're moving rocks, we're doing all these things all day long, and all day my right foot started to hurt like really bad to the point where I thought I broke my foot and I'm like, oh my God, I broke my foot. How did I break my foot? But then I'm like, we've been really physical all day. I've literally been jumping on shovels. We've been doing all this stuff. So maybe I broke my foot. I can't believe it.
Wow.
But to the point where I almost couldn't walk. And it was my right foot. And I was driving. So I get all the students at the end of the day into the van, the bus, and I drove them off, dropped them off in the dorms. And I called my wife and I'm like, look, I think I broke my foot. I got to go to the hospital for an x-ray. She's like, really? I said, yeah. So I go to the hospital. And we live in this little town. We have this very little hospital. Anyhow, they do an x-ray and they come back and they say, hey, listen, your foot's fine. You have gout. I'm like, it was a devastating blow to me. I'm like, oh, I don't eat a gouty diet. I'm like, no, I can't have gout. Like you have gout, take these pills. And I'm just like most doctors would say.
Huh.
And then they said, don't eat any meat, eat nothing but vegetables. And whatever the diet that they typically put you on for gout. I'm like, I know that I don't have gout. I know I don't. So then the next day, that kept getting worse. And this is completely unrelated, maybe, but I have 2 corneal transplants that I got 20 something years ago. I had long story. I had an eye disease. I went blind. Long story, but I had these corneal transplants for years. They've been fine. All of a sudden, like I'm starting to get light sensitive. Like the day after the gout thing happened, I'm like, I can't keep my eyes open. Everything's bright. So I wore sunglasses all day. And then every day it got worse to the point where I'd sit on the couch to watch TV with my wife, with Christina, and I had 2 pairs of sunglasses on, my eyes streaming with tears because I couldn't keep my eyes open. I was so light sensitive. And I go to my current surgeon, and I can't keep my eyes open. He can't even look at my eyes. I have people on either side of me holding my eyes open so he can look through his little machine.
Sounds
he can
miserable.
Look at my eyes. And he's like, there's nothing wrong with you. I'm like, doc, can't keep my eyes open. Something's wrong. He's like, no, there's nothing wrong. Take these drops. And I'm like, what are these drops? And they're like, well, it's not going to fix anything, but they're kind of like aspirin for the eye. They're just going to numb your symptoms and we'll wean you off them as soon as we can. 7 years, I wasn't able to wean off these drops. Anyhow, so I can't keep my eyes open. It's so bad that at one point, I'm trying to drive home, 2 pairs of sunglasses on. I have to pull over and Christina has to come get me because I couldn't drive. So anyhow, this had gone, and finally it started, both of those things started to dissipate a bit. The foot thing, it would come and go, and my eyes, because I was taking those drops, it was still there, but I just couldn't feel it because I was numbing my eyes twice a day with these silly drops that I kept trying to wean. It was the only medicine in the world that I took, and I was so just wanting to get off it. This goes on and on and on for years. And then more recently, several years ago, I was about to go on a research trip to Bolivia and Peru to live in the mountains with indigenous Aymara and Quechua Indian families. But I was going to be out of touch with like anybody for a long time. Not a long time, like several weeks. And I had this neck pain for almost a year at that point. Again, these only things in my life health-wise was this foot thing, this eye thing, and this weird neck pain that I couldn't get rid of. It bothered, not enough that like I was debilitated, but enough that I thought about it every day. Mentally, it was wearing on me. And a friend of mine, the weekend before I was going to Bolivia, friends of Christina's and mine from Africa, from Tanzania, came to visit. I'm sorry, from Kenya. I'm sorry, from Kenya. And they came to visit, and she had just got over bacterial meningitis.
Wow.
And she was telling me the symptoms of the bacterial meningitis. Like she literally almost died. And it was the same kind of symptoms, many of them that I was experiencing. And I knew I didn't have bacterial meningitis because if I did, I'd have been dead 9 months earlier. But it just freaked me out. And I was going to Bolivia and all this. And I said, Christina, I'm going to go take me to I just want to get scanned in every way possible. Like if there's something wrong with me, I want to know before I can't call you and I'm dead in the middle by Lake Titicaca or something. So anyhow, I go to the doctor, like, nothing's wrong with you. They did MRIs, they did CAT scans, everything. There's nothing wrong with you. Like, there's something wrong with me. All these doctors keep telling me nothing's wrong with me. And here I got all these weird pains happening. Otherwise I'm completely healthy. So a year later, I'm on the phone with Sally Norton for the first time ever. And I was pre-interviewing her for something I was going to interview her for. And we started talking, and I had never heard of oxalates. Well, I heard of them, but I never really knew what they were. And she's telling me this and that. And she's like, she started to say something, and something clicked with me. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I started to tell her the story about what I had eaten, and then jumping on the shovels. And before I said gout, she goes, they said you had gout. I said, yes. She goes, did they test it for uric acid? I said, no, you didn't have gout. you didn't have to get from uric acid, you had this thing from the oxalates.
Wow.
Oh my God. So I hung up the phone and I'm Googling everything I can, going down a rabbit hole. And then I started thinking about it more. I'm like, wait a minute, because I saw on there that the oxalates can get deposited in your corneas too. I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. I'm Googling and I look at the symptoms and it was exactly what I was experiencing. So Christina, come here. And I said, when I had that issue with my foot, when did I have an issue with my eyes? She goes, it was the same week. I'm like, no way. I cut oxalates out of my diet. All of it, literally all of it went away. The foot thing never came back. My eyes, first time in 7 years, I never took a drop since that moment forward. Actually, one day I took a drop like a month later because I was doing something with the camera and I needed to not be squinting. One drop in 7 years. I couldn't.
Wow.
One drop the neck pain completely gone. It's unbelievable.
That sounds like, yeah, like such freedom. Like what a relief. Like pretty much that time span was like a week of stopping oxalate foods, or
no, it was a week. I actually did feel relief within a week. I felt like complete relief within several months. What I didn't realize, and I should have been a little more careful with, is that I should have probably weaned myself a little bit more slowly. Like if I go to do something, I do it 100%. So I'm like, oh, no oxalates. And I didn't have a huge dumping session then, but which can be very dangerous and also very painful, obviously. But I did get that dumping about 3 years when I started through my face.
Yeah.
About 3 years later, and to talk to Sally Norton, she says a lot of the people that she deals with, once they've completely removed oxalates from their diet, it's about 3 years later that they start experiencing some of those dumping symptoms. In many cases, it's very weird.
Does chocolate have oxalates?
It does, unfortunately.
That's the one thing that's like still in my diet.
It's not insane, and it's like anything else. We've made oxalates an issue. They weren't necessarily an issue as much in the past. You have a little bit of chocolate here and there, it's not a very big deal. Even if you have spinach, one of the worst offenders in the world, the 2 weeks out of the year that it actually grow in your area, no big deal. But we call them superfoods. And we have people I know people that would do a spinach shake in the morning, eat spinach at lunch, a spinach salad for lunch. Sometimes you have spinach for dinner, and 365 days out of the year. And we create that problem,
Totally. Yeah. I remember my friend telling me he was like getting healthy. And I was like, awesome. He's like, yeah, I changed my diet. And he's like, the healthiest food. He was just like telling me all this stuff. He's like, I'm eating spinach, and I'm just like cringing. And I'm like, no. And he's like, wait, what? And I'm like, that's definitely not the healthiest food. And he's like, what do you think it is? I'm like, I'd probably argue maybe like beef liver, but yeah.
I would agree with you 100%.
Yeah. But it's just so funny to see the contrast of thinking. But yeah, I won't touch spinach these days.
I won't either. I have not intentionally eaten spinach in years. Or
do you miss it?
No. I do miss almonds. I do almonds, and it turns out, believe it or not, what my issue really was, I never even ate that much spinach. It was the nuts, especially the almonds. Almonds are my go-to snack. I'm like, okay, I want a low carb snack that's got some protein in it, and I'm just grabbing handfuls of nuts from the cupboard, and that is what that was the highest amount of oxalates in my diet were coming from nuts.
Yeah.
If anybody's listening, I was like, I don't want to give up my nuts. Hold on, wait a second. Low. So almonds are really, really high. Pine nuts are really, really high. Pistachios are fairly low. And both for snacking, pistachios are pretty good to snack on. And I especially like them if you get them with the shell on them, because it slows you down a little bit. You got to take the shell off. And it's not that hard to do.
Yeah.
But they also make a great pesto. So for those of you who are like, I can't give up my pine nuts because of pistachio pesto is amazing. Sesame seeds, poppy seeds are off the charts high. In fact, I came across an article that was written in the 80s, I think, that was suggesting, I think, that sesame seeds might be the highest oxalate containing food in the grocery store.
Oh, wow.
And they aren't, but they thought this at the time.
Okay.
But they're high enough to at least be really ranked high. The problem with sesame seeds that's what tahini is made from. So many people are eating massive amounts of tahini or hummus, and that's all coming from sesame seeds.
Didn't
So,
even think of
but
that.
we make we here at the restaurant at home, we use pumpkin seeds, and sunflower seeds are on the lower end of the oxalate level, so they're great. And so we make all of our we make a tahini like nut butter out of, or seed butter out of sunflower seeds, and it works great. So we make hummus with that. That's a great way to do it.
Sounds much safer and just as delicious. But
Yeah,
I'm right there. Yeah, I'm right there with you on the nuts. I went through like a phase of being obsessed with nuts, like raw nuts, and I just thought they were so convenient. They were touted as healthy, and I didn't have to do anything. Like I would just get some nuts and I'm good to go. Like going to school and working, like don't have to cook in it or anything. But
see, you just said it. That was perfect. I didn't have to do anything, and that's the issue, because we don't have to do that anymore. It used to be we'd have to go collect the nuts, we'd have to dry the nuts, we'd have to roast the nuts, we'd have to take the hull off, we'd have to crack the shell, we'd have to gather this, we have to do this. Then all of a sudden, all of this labor and time later, we have a little bit of nuts in our hand. But now, and then, so when I was really young, that's the only way we got nuts. We didn't gather all of our nuts, but we would get nuts in the shell, because nobody sold nuts in the grocery store without the shell on it in the 70s. I mean, and if they did, it would have been way too expensive for us to afford. So we had nuts, and my grandparents would have them at their house on holidays, nuts in the shells with a nutcracker. And I'd sit there so happy for hours, and I'd get a handful of nuts, hours worth of work. And it only happened on holidays. Then they started to put nuts without shells in the grocery store, but we couldn't afford them. Like the limiting mechanism there was price. You just couldn't afford them.
Yeah.
And now you can go to any big box store, BJ's or Costco, and get a bag of shelled almonds this big for $10, and then sit there and say, you don't have to work for it. There's nothing stopping you from, and everybody's telling you, these nuts are so good for you. And then there's all these issues.
Yeah. A bag of oxalates.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess oxalates are the biggest thing that you've changed your mind on. Like, yeah. Okay. Amazing. Let's jump into industrial food processing versus ancestral food processing. There's a huge difference, and I feel like your work speaks volumes to this.
Well, thank you. And it's such an important thing. I wish we had a different term than food processing in both of those cases.
It's
kind of like the issue that we have with the word fat. Like the fat, many other languages, the term fat that we eat and the fat on our body are two different words. But for us, it's the same word, and it's very easy to unfortunately misassociate them together and say, if I eat fat, I'm going to get fat, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing here. It's unfortunate that we have the same exact phrase for one thing that's incredibly positive and one thing that's incredibly negative. And the story that I usually tell is when I was teaching at Washington College, I would teach all sorts of anthropology classes, archaeology classes. Some are really old, some are modern things. And I was teaching one class about modern industrial. I forget what the class was, but the theme for part of the semester was about modern industrial food system. And another class that semester, I was teaching this prehistoric archaeology class, and food. Obviously, I was talking about food at some level. And I had this one female student happened to be in both those classes that same semester. And about halfway through the semester, she pulled me aside and said, "Professor Schindler, look, I got to ask you a question. You say food processing in both of those classes, but in the archaeology class with prehistoric diets, it's like you're shy, you're smiling, you're so excited, and food processing is an amazing thing. And you say it in this other class about modern food processing, and you look like somebody who's ran over your dog. Like, what's the difference?" I looked at her and I said, somebody very early on taught me that when you don't have an answer right away, say, "You'll find out." And so I looked at her and I said, "I know there's a difference. I haven't really defined it in my head. I'll figure it out and I'll get back to you." And finally, but when she came up to me about it, it made me think in a very, very good way. So this is what I responded after. It took me about a week to figure out how to respond. Food processing in the past. Now, I don't want to make a blanket statement for 3.5 million years of food processing all over the world, different cultures, different groups, and it's always the same thing. But in general, from what we can tell from the archaeological record and what we can tell from the ethnographic record, so looking at what traditional and indigenous groups are still doing today that are carrying on, traditions for long periods of time, kind of like this kind of thing Weston Price would have reported on. Food processing in the past was focused on three things: making food safe, nutrient dense, and bioavailable. So you have all these resources in your environment. Most of them, I would suggest almost all of them, are not safe and bioavailable for our human body without some sort of help. We have to do something to it before we put it into our mouths. And that food processing does it. So it's things like soaking and sprouting and fermenting and nixtamalizing, or a nose-to-tail approach to animal. I mean, there's a whole array of things that we can do to a raw material. Slicing, dicing, cooking it, putting it into a blender, whatever, doing something to that food that makes it safer, more nutrient dense, or more bioavailable. That's awesome. And in fact, we did such a good job of it that our guts shrank in relationship to our body, our teeth shrank in relationship to our body. So the only two sort of things that we biologically have that allow us to do those three things internally, right? To make food safe, nutrient dense, and bioavailable, those, our guts and our teeth, were getting smaller and going away as our bodies and our brains were getting bigger. And both of those things are nutritionally expensive. Not only do they need more calories, but they need more incredibly high quality nutrition to support that body and brain growth. It should be that our bodies are growing, our brains are growing. So that means our guts are growing and our teeth are getting bigger to do, more work. Our muscles that control our jaw should be getting bigger, but all that is going away and getting smaller because we're doing such a good job using technology to process raw materials to make them as safe, nutrient dense, and bioavailable as possible. So that's why what that student saw when I was smiling ear to ear when I'd say food processing in the past, that's what I was talking about. Now, modern industrial food processing is processing raw materials, unfortunately, for other reasons, to make other people money, so that things will ship better, so that they'll be more uniform. And again, that list goes on and on and on and on as well. But in somebody else making money on some sort of an industry is not necessarily a bad thing. It's bad when it's at the expense of safety, nutrient density, and bioavailability. And that's what most of the modern industrial food processing is doing. It is processing food for reasons other than making us healthy at the expense of those things that actually built us as humans.
Amazing picture. And I love when you speak about our brains getting bigger, our bodies getting bigger, our teeth getting smaller, and our digestive tracts getting smaller, because it's the opposite of what you would think. But when you bring in the picture of like the tools that we created and the processing that we're able to do with those tools, then it makes sense.
I mean, think about the job that your teeth have. If you were to put if I were to hand you a hunk of raw red meat and say, here, chew this, you'd sit there and chew it for a long time. Yeah. Now, instead of that, you run it in a meat grinder. Like, your teeth were there for a reason, and your teeth just got not only replaced by that meat grinder, but exponentially more efficient at breaking down that meat to the point where our bodies can actually do something with it. Two real quick things I wanted to mention. One is, if you look at the technologies, I hate to fall into that trap of dividing like plants in our diet and animals in our diet. And I don't want to get into a polarized kind of, vegan carnivore kind of conversation, because that's not fruitful at all. But for a minute, let's separate plants and animals in our diets, because from a technological perspective, there's two huge differences that I want to highlight. Prior to the agricultural revolution, about 10 to 12,000 years ago, when everything changes, but just, our hunter-gatherer ancestors for millions of years, if we look at the technological inputs in including animals in our diets and including plants in our diets, there's two very stark differences. So one is about getting those resources. What kind of technologies did we develop to actually access those resources to get them? And again, this is before agriculture, so we're not talking about plows and harvesting and all that sort of thing. We're talking about just hunter-gatherers collectively foraging. There's hardly any tools that you need in order to do that. Almost everything you can do with your fingers, right? Maybe you need a digging stick to get some roots, and maybe a sharp edge on the edge of a rock might help you get something. But for the most part, you're collecting berries and pulling things out of the ground and that sort of thing. So we don't need much technology to get those things. But with animals, you do, right? In animals, we've created most of our technological input with including animals in our diets has been focused on getting that animal, overcoming our physical limitations and getting that animal. So bows and arrows and atlatls and spears and nets and traps and boomerangs and throwing sticks and all of those things that allow us to get the animal is where our focus was what we're focused on for creating these technologies. Once you have your plants and once you have your animals, there's another huge difference. When that animal requires almost no processing whatsoever to make it as bioavailable as it can be, right? Literally, you need a sharp edge to get into that animal and you're done. I mean, especially with the organ meats, the blood, the fat in the organs, most nutrient dense part, it's incredibly bioavailable. You don't have to cook it. You can chew it up. It's soft. It's great. The meat does hunks of raw red meat do benefit slightly with a little bit of processing. So either a little bit of cooking or a little bit of cutting. And if you think about going to a really, really, really nice restaurant, ordering raw meat, it comes in one of two ways: either as carpaccio, which means it's been sliced super thin, or as tartare, where it's been run through a meat grinder. In both those cases, it's been physically broken down to help make it a little bit easier for our digestive tract to have access to it. But other than that, you don't have to do anything to that animal. The plants, on the other hand, which require almost no technologies to get, require a massive amount of technologies to make them safe, to get rid of their toxins, and to also unlock their nutrients and make them available to our human bodies. So while most of the technologies around animals are about getting them for 3.5 million years or 2 million years, most of the technologies around plants are about how to make them safe and how to unlock their nutrients.
Wow. So yeah, it's a lot of work foraging for the plants itself is, I guess, not a lot of work, but to actually make them safe, bioavailable, and nourishing is a lot more work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned nixtamalization. That's how you say it. I'd imagine, yeah, I'd imagine a lot of my listeners don't know what that is, but can you go into that a little bit?
Can I go grab another prop real quick?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Sorry, I have all these cool things up here. I gotta
love
show you
it.
guys. All right, so here's my little kamal that has some maize and other things on it. A couple of things I want to notice. One is this is an heirloom variety of maize from Oaxaca. Here is a slightly older version, and what I want, the reason I'm bringing this up for a second is I wanted you to see this. So if you ever saw what the wild ancestor to maize is, it's called teosinte. It's a grass. Maize is a grass. Corn's a grass. If you let your grass in your yard just go and you don't mow it for several weeks, what the stalk that comes up and the seed head on top looks really close to what the ancestor to maize is. So the plant that people in Mexico were messing with to selectively genetically change it into what we have today as maize really didn't seem like it had a whole lot to offer. It had these little hard seeds. There's a big debate right now whether they were actually domesticating it for food or for alcohol first, because it's a lot of work. But it went through several different genetic mutations to get to what the different mazes that we have today. But here's one. One thing you'll notice, I don't know if you can see this, is that every single kernel of maize is covered in its own sheath. Like if you think about it, I gave you corn on the cob, you sit there and you're pulling these big leaves down, and the entire cob is surrounded. So one of the genetic mutations that were selected for was to get rid of this and make it so much. Think about how much easier it is to process if all you have to do is pull. I mean,
for sure.
You think it's a pain in the butt. Your mom's like, "Hey, get the corn and shuck it outside." And like, "Oh, mom!" But if she gave you that, you'd really be pissed off. So, so a bunch of several different genetic mutations, and then we get into something that is more like that, right? So this is the kind of maize. So this kind of thing that feed corn level sort of dent corn. This is actually heirloom maize again from Oaxaca. But so this is what we have. Maize was first domesticated sometime around 8, some people suggest 10, but around 8,000 years ago or so. We believe the earliest example of this is in the Balsas Valley of Mexico. So we have this. Great. We have people are eating maize, spreads all over South America, Central America, North America, becomes a staple in many different diets. Entire civilizations, in some cases, were built on the backs of maize. But what we don't necessarily realize today is that maize is one of the most difficult grains in the world for the human body to completely and fully digest. And I know, I think I mentioned this when I saw you at the Western Price Conference, but the one thing I'll say is if you've ever eaten corn on the cob and you've ever looked in the toilet the next day, you see kernels of corn, whole kernels of corn in the toilet.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen it, it's because you haven't looked. It's there.
Right. Yeah.
And even if I took this maize or this corn, now the corn on the cob that you eat is, well, it's a little bit of a slightly different version than this, but it's actually an unripe cob of corn. It actually is a little bit more like fruit than it is a grain like this. But regardless, when you get to this dried stage, if you grind it up and have cornmeal and you make cornbread out of it or whatever you're going to make out of it, if you eat it, you're not going to see that cornmeal in the toilet the next day, but because it's already ground up. But what you don't realize is that a lot of the nutrients that are in this maize is inaccessible to your body in that state. Grind it up, cook it, boil it, doesn't matter. It's inaccessible to your body. And the main one is niacin. So without going into a long, deep conversation about it, and you can look this up, there's a lot of information, but for the past several hundred years, once maize was taken away from the Americas and brought over to Europe, they took the crop, but not the technology that people who have spent 8,000 years with maize developed in order to unlock those nutrients, make them as bioavailable as possible. They just took the corn. And it's hard to believe, but over just 300 years, millions of people around the world have gotten incredibly sick. Hundreds of thousands around the world have died as a result from the nutrient deficiency of niacin in their diet because they ate massive amounts of corn that haven't been processed properly.
Dang.
And the only way to unlock the nutrient niacin in the maize is to do something called nixtamalize it. So nixtamalizing means nothing more than you take the maize and put it in an alkaline water with a lot of alkalinity in it, simmer it for about 30 minutes, let it sit in that hot water overnight, rinse it, and that's literally all you have to do. If you at that point you have something called nixtamal in the U.S. pre-Civil War, you would have called it hominy, or you would have actually called it grits. And if you grind it up, you have something called masa. It was done originally with wood ash. Now in Mexico, they use this white stuff here is called cal or calcium hydroxide. They dig it up out of the ground, and some of the big people that are manufacturing sometimes would even use lye, which is sodium hydroxide. But regardless, it's a very, very easy thing to do. Cal, you can buy it. You can buy it online. You can buy it at Mexican grocery stores. But is also you can find it at Walmart. It's exactly the same thing as pickling lime. And you put a little pickling lime in the water, put the maize in, bring it to a simmer for about half an hour, turn off the heat, let it sit overnight, rub off the skins on the outside, and then you have a completely different food than you had the day before. Completely different food. And if you use calcium hydroxide, which is cal or pickling lime, not only have you unlocked the niacin and made it available to our bodies, but you also it has a higher calcium content, and it also changes the proteins and make them again more usable to our bodies. But here's the really crazy part of it. Think about millions of people around the world getting sick, hundreds of thousands dying because of a nutrient deficiency of niacin in their diet while eating nothing but corn, which has niacin in it. Their niacin was going right through their bodies, just like the corn on the cob kernels going right through our bodies. They were eating the food that had it. It just wasn't accessible. I mean, corn is like the poster child for the need to do the right kinds of food processing to our food. And it's very easy to do. So I'll give you one little bit more modern example. And it was only several years ago. Turns out that there were wild hamsters in France. And these wild hamsters, who would have known? These wild hamsters, farmers love them because they burrow through the soil, they turn over the soil, they do all these wonderful things. Well, they noticed, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, something, that the population of these wild hamsters in France was plummeting. So they started to study the wild hamsters. The farmers weren't happy, so they started studying these hamsters, and it was happening in areas where they were planting corn. And it turns out that these hamsters were so deficient in their diets because they were eating what in the fields they were living in, so eating all this corn. They were deficient in niacin. They were eating their own young.
Wow.
They were eat, they'd have a baby, they turn around and eat it. So their numbers were plummeting.
Dang.
And they did some studies and started to supplement the hamsters with niacin, and all of a sudden they stopped doing it.
Wow.
I mean, it's not only for humans, it happens around the world.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, so for us, for you and for me, we eat a little bit of corn, eat a little bit of corn here, eat a little bit of corn there. Not a very big deal because we're eating so many other things that also have niacin in them that it's not like we're going to get pellagra, which is the disease you would get from it because of that. But there are people around the world still, especially in Africa, that are subsisting primarily on corn and are having the same sorts of issues. But for you and for me and for anybody listening to this, I don't care how varied your diet is. Why would you eat a food not processed, to maximize the nutrient, availability of that food to your human body? When you could do something different, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you're intentionally eating something and letting a lot of the nutrition go directly through your body. It's like you're creating an empty calories sort of situation.
Yeah, it's just my body using energy to digest food that's not actually nourishing me. Like it's such a waste of my body's energy,
The cool thing is, and I know we don't have time to go into the entire process here, it is incredibly easy to do. We know for sure people have been doing it for 4,000 years because we have archaeological evidence that shows it's at least 4,000 years old. We just developed a technique in the past 2 years that allow us to directly identify it in the archaeological record, like this was nishtomatized. And I haven't seen data come out from it yet, but I'm confident that 4,000-year-old mark is going to get pushed back to the entirety of 8,000 years. There's no way that it couldn't.
Wow.
And if people were doing it with clay pots over an open fire in the middle of the Balsas Valley of Mexico, you could do it in their stove in an apartment in New York City, easy enough. Plus, it not only changed, this is like the same thing with any nourishing food. Really true nourishing food not only is better for you, but it's more satiating, it tastes better, it smells better, it has better texture. So your entire experience of eating maize is going to completely change when you start nishtomatizing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the most valuable points that you made was like when we do the proper processing, it's a completely different food. And you can have a conversation with someone who would like argue that certain foods were a part of our diet for centuries, and they might be right, but it's not exactly the same food because they processed it in a way that we're not doing.
Absolutely. Bread is a great example, or there's so, actually, I would suggest that every major part of our diet has been diminished at some level because there's been, the modern industrial food system has shortcut different methods, and any one of them, not a very big deal for most of us because we're getting all this different food in different places. But the problem is it's happening every time we turn around. Every food that we put into our mouth at some level, somebody else has done the processing, they've shortcut something, and we're getting less for it.
So true. I could talk to you forever about so many different things, but the next topic I wanted to bring up was your recent trip to Sardegna, because I was there, I'm pretty sure at the same exact time that you were there. Totally different part. I was in the upper tip, Santa Teresa Gallura, and I think you were more southern. But
we did go up. We were up on the northeast, and then we came down. Yeah.
Okay, cool. But I was there at the end of June, and I'm pretty sure you were there at the same time.
I think it was the same time.
Yeah.
It was beautiful weather. It was so
amazing.
Beautiful.
Yeah. But if you can share more about what you were doing there and your experience, because I just love the contrast of the way we live versus your experience of I guess it was the family you were staying with and how they live, and just any powerful takeaways that you had from being there and learning.
Have you been there before that trip?
No, that was my first trip. Yeah.
Oh, are you going back?
I would love to. Yeah. I want to see the southern half because I was only in the northern half, and I was only there for a week, and I feel like I could spend a lot more time there.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And what I didn't know, because I had never read any of these Blue Zone books before I went or any of that stuff. What I didn't know was the main center or main village that we spent time doing research in was the epicenter of the first blue zone ever identified.
Oh,
so it was in
wow.
Villa Grande and Oleastra. So which I didn't realize until we were actually there. And I'm like, I've heard about these. So I didn't
That's
know much
even
about it. But
better.
now it's even better. And it's even better after I watched the Netflix special. Have
I
you
haven't seen it. No.
It's not worth it. But
Yeah. My TV is actually in my garage right now. I have to bring it inside. I just
no,
moved and
it's much better in your garage.
okay.
We were in Villa Grande, and it was we were all in a lot of different places, but the main reason I went was the main reason that I spent 10 years trying to go was because there's a particular kind of bread called panaspelli, which is an ancient bread. Pliny wrote about it. It's made out of acorns, and the acorns are processed with clay and ash.
Wow.
And in order to detoxify them. And I was fascinated, and I wanted to learn more about this. And it turns out that supposedly I tried for 10 years. Every time I turned around, nobody makes it anymore. There's nobody left alive that know how to make this. And I'd get close, and then all of a sudden I find out so-and-so died, and nobody knows how to make this anymore. They don't make it anymore. It was an old thing back in the day. And I tried and I tried and I tried, and I put it away for about 4 years. And then just a few years ago, I went through a different avenue, and I forget how I got on this, but the Department of Natural Resources for Italy was doing a project in Sardinia about the oak trees because they were trying to save these oak trees. And it turns out that it's the same oak trees that produce the acorns that this acorn bread was made out of. So as a part of this, they had found these 3 women in this one little village that still knew how to make it.
Amazing.
So again, it took years, and I finally got in contact with somebody who knew these 3 women, and it turns out that they were too old to meet with it and pass on. But the one woman had taught her son, so her son was very willing to have us in. We had a fantastic time. But
Amazing.
The main reason I went over there was because of this, learning to make this panaspelli, this acorn bread. But then in my research about Sardinia and trying to figure that out, I've realized what an amazing food culture they had. A brilliant food culture. Their cheese was top. Their cheese was fantastic, and they had, but especially their nose to tail approach to animals, which is what probably my largest passion, food related passion, is about. Complete nose to tail approaches to animals for not only nutritional reasons, but also for ethical and sustainability reasons. And so I was like, look, we are going to spend time with some amazing people that are going to show us how to do all of these things. And I got in touch with this fantastic food historian. Her name is Gisela Rubia, and she's written several books on traditional Sardinian food. And she was our main contact. She speaks no English, and I speak almost no Italian. But
they
don't
even
brilliant.
speak Italian. They speak like some dialect.
Yeah, and that's the other thing.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. So it was wonderful. In fact, she's publishing her 3rd book, and she just asked me to write the afterword for it. I'm so honored because she's amazing.
What an honor.
But we get there to Villa Grande, and just a couple of quick takeaways. We drove in. We were staying with this cheesemaker before that, a couple hours south, and we drove from at Sinos Formaggio. Amazing. He does all wild fermentations on his cheese, and wonderful. But we were driving, the whole family was in this little rental car, and as you know, Sardinian roads are not straight and flat at all. So it took us hours to go almost no distance, hours up and down. I bottomed the car out once on rocks. We finally get there. The entire car is about to throw up. Everybody just wants to get out of the car and like lay down on a bed or something. We get out, and we're in this mountain village, and we get out of the car, and she meets us. She's but there was her niece was there as a translator and all this. I'm like, okay, let's go take a walk. No, I want to go. My daughter's like, yeah, lay down. Nope, we got to go. So we go take this walk. Hours. We go walking for hours. This is how we spend the time. They talk in and walk in, and it was wonderful. So we're walking forever. We come back to the house, the family we're staying with, and a couple of things I think were really important about this particular case. So this Villa Grande still hold, and they have the sign on the way in. They hold the Book of World Records for the largest number of centenarian males in the world.
Amazing.
So not only living over 100, but males, the largest number of males living over 100, which is less common than females living over 100. And right next door was a 103-year-old man living on the second floor of the house, up and down steps every day, completely on his own.
So cool.
He does it all himself. But what I thought was fascinating was, the thing that I pride myself on as far as food's concerned in our home is that we make everything 100% from scratch.
So
it took
cool.
years to get to that point. And then we opened up a restaurant with the same thing. We make literally everything 100% from scratch. Here,
That's
we make
phenomenal.
all the cheese. But it's not a very common thing. Everybody there did. Like
Wow.
every time we sat down to, I felt so humbled. I'm like, I'm not doing anything special. These people have been doing it we sit down at this table, huge spread of food. Not only did they make everything themselves, it was their pigs, right? It was their goats that they, or sheep that they got the milk from. It was their orchard that they picked these from. They made the olive oil from their olives. So not only did they make literally everything from scratch, all the raw materials were grown and raised by them. And
what
this
a
was
dream.
meal after meal. And I'm sitting there looking and I'm thinking to myself, when I drove in, at that point, I realized what Fil de Grande was and how it held these records, and that was the Blue Zone thing. So I had started already to look into it a little bit more and think, okay, I'm coming to a village which some people would suggest had the healthiest people on the planet living, at least longest living people in the world. What would I expect to see? Well, in modern American standards, you'd expect to see a gym on every corner. You'd expect to see a bunch of nutritionists, offices in a bunch of different places. And with all these old people, you'd expect to see all these retirement homes everywhere. And we saw none of that, none of it.
Phenomenal.
There were no gyms because they were always moving around all day long. To tell them they were going to go exercise was like, why would I go exercise? I'm freaking walking up and down this mountain 60 times a day. They have no questions about their food. Like there's no questions at a table like that. There are no questions. They know exactly how the animals and the plants were raised. They know exactly how the animals and the plants were cooked. They know how it was plated. They know all of it. And there's no retirement homes because they're not. Here in America, we have a life expectancy to a certain age, but for most of us, the last 10, 20 years of life are, really unfortunate. We can't get around or suffering, or other people have to take care of us. Their minds are there, their bodies are there. They got this 103-year-old guy walking up and down these steps. It was amazing. But I did ask them, and people ask them all the time. They said, "I said, okay, I'm an American. I want to know, what's the secret? What's the secret to living?"
Yeah.
And the immediate response, and I heard this from several different people, was, "We're nice." I'm like, "Yeah, but what do you eat?" No. You don't understand. We're nice. That is the key. We're nice. It's pleasant. We come and we visit one. And it was. And first of all, there was no one thing.
Yeah.
But it was that they're nice. It was that they walk and exercise all the time. There's no links in their food chain. I mean, it was brilliant. But what was really problematic for me after I came back, and then I started to really dive into the Blue Zone thing, is that what's reported in the Blue Zone information is literally the exact opposite diet-wise than the reality. At least, again, this is a limited example. I was only in the Sardinian part of it, but I've heard other people who have been in those areas in Costa Rica for that Blue Zone, have been in the area in Greece, in that Blue Zone, and no, it's the exact opposite. It's not like a 80% vegetables, 20% animal. It's
right.
80% animal and 20% vegetable, as if we even need to get down into that. But what I found interesting watching some of the I had to turn it off, but watching some of the Netflix stuff was, other than the diet part, what I saw he was spot on for. He would say the same thing. People were moving all the time. They were visiting with one another. They were doing all of these things, which is great. And he's building this argument on facts. And then all of a sudden he throws in this dietary piece and it's like, yeah, but all they eat is vegetables and hardly any meat. Whoa, no, it's not true. But you already believe him because all the other stuff, makes so much sense.
Yeah. He's muddying the water with truth and mistruths.
Yeah. So what was your experience like?
People were really nice. And I just my favorite part, people asked me what my favorite part of Sardegna was just watching and admiring the interactions between each other. Like they just had so much joy and like pride, like talking to one another. And it didn't seem like that they were distracted at all. It was like, if this person's in front of me, then that's 110% of where my attention goes. And that's the way they made me feel too. I didn't stay with a family. We were at a hotel, but the hotel experience was very family-like as well. So yeah, they were very nice. There was a lot of lamb on the menus, a lot of octopus. What else? And then I was just enjoying those crystal blue waters. So
it was beautiful. So if anybody, I can't believe they haven't filmed more movies here, but I guess the most recent one they filmed was the new Little Mermaid, which makes complete sense. Like,
is that where it was filmed?
Yeah, that's what at least my youngest daughter told me. It makes complete sense.
So cool.
We're running a trip. We're going to run a trip to Italy, food, culture, history, prehistory tour, and it'll end up most of the time will be spent in Sicily and Sardinia.
So cool.
It was fantastic. One other, I don't know if this is relevant to anything we're talking about, but it struck me, and it was so cute. We went one day. We travel out of the village into like the middle of nowhere, into the side of this mountain, where there are these two shepherds. We'd already set it up ahead of time, and we were making this cheese called caio di capretto, which is it's a rudimentary form of cheese making, where you take an unweaned goat and have it drink from its mother and fill its stomach with milk, and then you take the stomach out and hang it up for about 10 days, and it automatically turns into cheese. It's got all the rennet already in it. It's fermenting because it's raw milk and all this. So we were doing that, and then using the rest of the goat for to make a bunch of almost amazing use of entire animal I ever saw. But we're in the middle of nowhere, and we're doing all these very, middle of nowhere sorts of things. And it took us like an hour to get down this really crazy road down to where these shepherds were. And then we said goodbye. It was a magical day. Go all the way back up the mountain. And then Gisela, who we were with, she's like, oh, well, if you want to see, there was some sort of religious celebration happening in town that day at the church. And do you want to come see it? And they have flowers everywhere. And it has something, I forget the kids who got communion get the parade. It was this big deal. I'm like, absolutely. So we go line up, and we're waiting outside of this church for the ceremony to end, so everybody could parade out. And then they go and parade through town. And there's flowers everywhere, and everybody was dressed to the nine. And we're standing there, and we're waiting, and kids are getting a little antsy, but it just was so beautiful and so cold, just so amazing. And so the people lined up on one side, and then there was this pathway for everybody to go through, and then there were people lined up on the other side. And I look up, and one of the shepherd I was just like literally butchering a goat in the middle of the woods with on the side of the mountain, standing there like dressed to the nine, ear to ear smile, ready to go. And I don't know why I found that so unusual, but it was. But to me, I think it was because you wouldn't see something like it. It really spoke to how usual and how commonplace what they were doing with those goats, was. This is what I do, and I'm going to come up to the church, and I got my nice stuff on. And, it wasn't this weird outlier, outcast from society that was doing this, and the weird dude up, it was just commonplace, and I found it beautiful.
No, that is awesome. I feel like it's kind of like, you think doing those kinds of activities, like working with the animals and being out in the field, is like, okay, that's what the farmer does. But it's like, no, this is for the everyday guy who's, just whatever his career is, or, lifestyle is. It's like, no, everyone does this,
Absolutely.
So no, that's really cool. Okay. So, man, we don't have too much time left, but I'm really excited because this weekend I'm for the first time picking up brain from my farmer's market. And I don't know anyone who's
what kind?
Beef brain.
Beef brain. Very nice.
Well, that's what it's going to be. Is beef calf, I guess. Yeah.
Calf brain. It would have to be, I think, legally. Yeah.
Yeah, but I know you've eaten brain before, right? Do you have any tips
in a couple.
or?
The first time I ate brain was with was pork brains and eggs, scrambled
Okay.
eggs, which actually, believe it or not, go very, very well together. And the second time I ate brain was when we were doing the Nat Geo show, and we had a yak that we were cooking the head right over the fire and eating the brain, which I don't think was fully cooked, but that's another story. I don't have a whole lot of tips for brains, except there's something you definitely don't want to overcook. And truly, as an entry point into brains, believe it or not, they do pair really well with eggs.
Okay, amazing.
They really, really do.
I love eggs, so that's phenomenal. Cool.
Good luck. That's awesome.
Thank you. So I guess my last question will be for our listeners, what would you say is the benefit of connecting with our food? Like, why should we, have this intention to connect with what we're actually eating?
I was at an event last weekend, and one of the people that was there, we were talking about that exact question, and they told me, we were talking about Ozempic, the medication, and pharmaceutical industry in general, and using some of these other things to lose weight. And I'm not a huge fan of any of them. Right. And they kept saying, why? Why wouldn't you just, if you could just take this pill and it would do this, why wouldn't you just take it? And I'm looking at them for as odd as they thought my responses were. I thought that was an odd thing. And then one of the people said, yeah, like I want a world where the decisions that I make around my food have nothing to do with my health. Like, they're completely disconnected. Like, I can literally eat anything that I want, and I can look and feel a certain way, and it doesn't make a difference. And I think the pharmaceutical world can do that for me. And I'm like, whoa.
That's such a foreign way of thinking to me.
Something like that has never, ever crossed my mind.
Right.
And even when I was incredibly disconnected from my food, something like that never crossed my mind. And the reason I bring that up is because my response to him is very similar to what I'm going to say here to your question, because what he was discounting was the need to connect with your food for nutritional reasons. Like, he's like, okay, I can eat anything I want. I don't care where it comes from. I don't care who made it. I don't care if it's Doritos or Fruit Loops or whatever it is. I just want to eat it because I have this like craving for it. And then this pill or this other thing can, hopefully make me feel better. So why wouldn't I do it? And my answer was, well, first off, you want to, get rid of as many links in your food chain as possible and take complete control of your food system, so you know about your food and you can nourish yourself and your family. That's number one. But that's the part he was discounting. So let's say there's a perfect world. Let's say there's this really strange world where through the pharmaceutical world, you can, maintain. I know it sounds crazy, but this was the argument I was in. Eat all this, eat anything you want, and why else? Because that was the question he was asking. Why else would you care? And I'm like, the entire experience about knowing where your food comes from, harvesting it yourself, whether that means you're hunting or fishing or trapping or clamming or foraging or growing lettuce in your backyard, some sort of direct connection to that. You can't replace that with almost anything in life. And then being able to put it through a process that, makes sure that you're making it as safe, nutrient dense, and bioavailable as possible for yourself and for your family. And quite often, all the cultural pieces that are wrapped up in that, because that was what culture was founded on. That is what food systems have been founded on. All of that. And you can't disconnect that from the very fabric of what it means literally to be human. So when you're doing that, you're typically doing that with someone else or your entire family or your entire village. Yeah. And even if you could eat that Dorito which is impossible, but and maintain, biological health, you're missing out on almost everything that it means to be human, at least as far as food is concerned. And food is intertwined with everything that we do. Literally everything that we do. Food has made its way into politics. It's made its way into religion. It's made its way into tradition. It's made its way into, all of these things. So reconnecting with your food to me, is not only the most nourishing way towards biological health, but the most nourishing way to emotional and cultural health as well.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful answer. And it reminds me of the scene that you were describing with the family in Sardegna, where you were like, not a single item of food, like they were able to tell you exactly like who made it, where it came from. Like that sounds like such a dream. Like anytime I go out to eat, which is not very frequent, I'm just like asking a lot of questions and oftentimes not getting a lot of answers. So like to sit at that table and they're like, oh, it was like, you know, just a few yards down where I picked this, and like so and so put it together. Like it's such a intimate experience, and it speaks so well to like what it means to be human in the beautiful words of how you said it.
Absolutely. And again, what's really interesting about that is that wasn't the weird family. Like, that was everybody. Like if I picked up and went into the house next door and sat down for dinner,
So
it would have been the
cool.
same situation. And you know, the next door and the next door, which I think is really, really special.
That's amazing. When I go back, I definitely have to do more of an agro like tourismo experience.
Well, let me know how I can help. I'd be happy to put you in contact.
Amazing. That'd be awesome. So fantastic talking to you, Bill. Where can listeners find you?
All right. So there's a couple places. So my family and I have a restaurant called the Modern Stone Age Kitchen, which you can follow us on social media at Modern Stone Age Kitchen, and find on our website www.modernstoneagekitchen.com. And just as a quick little piece about what we're doing here, we're making familiar food as nourishing as it can possibly be. So you can come in here, and I mean, we do some weird things as well, but you can come in here and have pizza and sandwiches and yogurt and whatever it is, and it is truly the healthiest version you could possibly find. We're located in Chestertown, Maryland, which is on the Eastern Shore. We're only about an hour from DC, about an hour and a half from Philly, and about 2.5, 3 hours from New York City. So we're not that very difficult to get to. We also own a nonprofit and operate a nonprofit, which is where all of our research and our teaching and our outreach is funneled through. And that's called the Eastern Shore Food Lab. And you can find out information about that at ES Food Lab. And also eatlikeahuman.com has a lot of information about the nonprofit, about my book, and about all the work that we're doing, including a blog. And I'm on social media at Dr. Bill Schindler, so at Dr. Bill Schindler.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Dr. Bill. Really inspiring work. And I got to ask you, like, what are you most proud of? Like, out of all the things you do, like, is there something that you're just like most proud of?
I am most proud that I have been able to take what I'm passionate about and use it to nourish my family. And that was solely because my wife, you know, really made me see the light, say all this stone tools, all stuff is important. It's cool, it's fine, but how can you help our family? And that is the sole reason why I'm doing anything that I'm doing. So that's what I'm most proud of.
Really cool. So fantastic. I feel like it has a direct impact on your family, but the world at large too. So really inspiring work.
Well, it was great talking with you. Thanks for having me on.
Likewise. I'll see you soon, Dr. Bill, at the next conference. Ciao.
Sounds good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Highest Help. If you gained value from today's episode, leave a review, share with a friend, or post on social media. If you're interested in achieving your highest help or already pursuing it, send me a DM. I'd love to hear from you.